Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. It's Minion Masters Meta time, that's right. We're going to look at the meta for version 2.8, which we are in the middle of at the moment. Now, reminder, a lot of work goes into these videos, so if you're enjoying them, it would really make my heart smile if you subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up if you would like to. No pressure though. Okay, so just a reminder, what we do here is I scrape the leaderboards on a regular basis. So we're looking at the leaderboard meta. We end up with a huge spreadsheet, and then we look at that and we figure out what's good and what's not so good. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the data. Now, if you followed the videos last time, you'll have noticed that I split them up into separate videos for each game mode. Didn't seem to work out. The views weren't great, so we're going to go back to one video with everything. The good news is we're going to have more stuff in this video that was kind of developed for the other videos that we're not doing. But the idea is to have more in it, but it to be more concise, and we're going to get through it more quickly. So fingers crossed that works out. Okay, let's go. Right, master popularity. Here we can see overall master popularity. APEP is the overall master of choice, but of course that's not the same in all of the game modes. If you look here, this is broken down into yellow 1v1, red 2v2 randoms, and blue 2v2 pre-made. So overall, APEP, Ratbo, and wrecked, which is not something we would have said a few patches ago. APEP's gone up a lot since last season. Remember, it had the new alt perk, the perk 2, the minion book. Although it also did get a base attack nerf, that didn't seem to affect it. Also, wrecked went up. He got a new alt perk, the gun Carter. So that kind of makes sense there. Ratbo dropped down a bit. He did get a nerf in the last patch, specifically for 2v2s. So that kind of makes sense. And Tronvir dropped off a little bit. He had that attack change and his wind rune nerf. Right. So this is that same data, but just represented in a way that we can check out against last season. So on the left, pie chart, 2.7. On the right, 2.8, which is this season. So we can see last season, APEP, Stormbringer, sorry. I want to say Strongvir for some reason. Morelia and Valorian. But this season, APEP is number one. 6 months ago, APEP was always number one. That changed when the alt perks came in. But it seems like his new alt perk, the Book of the Black Obelisk, or whatever it's called, is really making him a strong choice. So APEP, Ratbo, Wrecked, and Stormbringer, the top 4 masters overall. But let's break them down into the different game modes. Solos, Wrecked, number one last season, number one this season as well. As I mentioned just before, he did receive a little base attack speed nerf, but he did get that new gun Carter, I think it is, perk, which people seem to like a lot. And Wrecked has been very popular in solos ever since the alt perks came in with the Mass Illusion for his perk 3. That's getting nerfed, I think, in the next patch, where it won't affect air units, so that's going to be way less problematic to play against with things like the Frost Feathers and the Bats. Okay, so Ratbo went up the most in solos, interestingly and surprisingly. Ravager also. Remember, Ravager did get a reworked or a buffed alt perk 1. So it affects 4+ instead of 5+ mana minions. So Ratbo went up the most, and Volko dropped off. But what about randoms? Okay, so in randoms, last season, Ratbo, 25% of the leaderboard decks was Ratbo. This season, he's still there in second place, down to 13%, and APEP is up to number one massively from the season before. He's gone up 13%. So APEP's gone up, Wrecked has gone up, and Ratbo and Morelia dropped off a lot. Average mana cost, we didn't mention it in solos, but it didn't really change much. 3.4, I think it was now. Randoms, 2v2 decks tend to be a little bit more expensive, but not too much. If you're new to the game, let's have a look at a random between, an average deck mana between sort of 3.5, 4.5, something like that. Okay, and then let's go across to pre-mates. Again, we look last season, the yellow Ratbo dominant, 28%, not so much now, down to 12%. APEP and Stormbringer have overtaken the Ratbo. So remember, the change to the Ratbo was that the Squeak attack, the alt perk 2, didn't buff the minions generated by your teammate. They were just normal ones. And that's going to get further nerfed in the next patch, I think. where there's going to be a cooldown between triggers for those. So APEP went up massively, 15%, up to 18 from 3. Milloween also went up, people enjoying her spellbook. Mordar as well, and as we mentioned, Ratbow dropping off and Stormbringer dropping off a lot as well, and mana cost not really changing much. And one of the things that we added fairly recently was the Draft Masters. You know, we have a big data set for these, so we should be able to get some usable data. But remember, Draft is not like the constructed decks. You can't make the decisions purely off of what you want. You just have to make the decisions based on what you're offered. So Valorian was nearly 20% of the draft leaderboard decks last season. He's down to 13%. Taking number 1 is Morelia. Setsu's gone up. I think Setsu did receive a little buff in the last patch. So Setsu and Morelia going up. Valorian dropping off, as well as Rekt dropping off. Right, this is going to be one of the slides we're going to skip over pretty quickly. Rarity composition, nothing really changes with that. Most of the cards in most of the decks are common. The game is not pay to win. And if we go over these slides quickly, especially towards the end, if you're interested in them, just pause the video and check it out for yourself. Right, meta composition, Voidborn is still, and even more still, the overall overall faction of choice. So Voidborn and Scrat still 1 and 2. Zenshi's come up a little bit, quite possibly due to a lot of people playing the fairly new Karmic card. Accursed has dropped off as well, and the faction compositions per game mode, if you want to look at those, go for it, but look at solos. Lots of Voidborn, so 2.8 on the top row, 2.7 on the bottom row. Right, wildcard usage, beautiful. No wildcards in solos or pre-mades. We do have it in randoms though, and you can see more people wildcarding overall. Last season, 65%, no wildcards. This season, only 52%. But, you know, it's the nature of the randoms beast. But what have they been wildcarding? Okay, so these are the top wildcarded cards. Of course, only in randoms. So Karmic is in there. Skeleton Crew, Tantrum Throwers. They're great little bridge grabs. Gorek Sacrifice, Arcane Ring, nice cheap spells. And, of course, the Defenso Chopper. We've seen the Defenso Chopper there a lot. But it kind of dropped off a lot this season. It's down 11% overall. From its 6th this season, down from 2nd. So maybe people feeling a way of dealing with it. And you know a great way of dealing with it? Karmic. And Karmic is the number 1 top wildcarded card. Up from 8th last season. So Karmic, Tantrum Throwers, Gorek Sacrifice, they've gone up a lot. And Defenso Chopper, Skeleton Crew dropping off quite a bit as well. So those are overall the top wildcarded cards. Right, so back to standard ranked mode. These are the top cards overall. So in solos, randoms, and pre-mades, these are the top played cards from our leaderboard data deck. And as you can see, Karmic, number 1, up from 15th last season. Defenso Chopper, 2nd, up from 5th. So it seems like more people are playing Defenso Chopper, but less people are wildcarding it. So interesting to see why that is. So Karmic's gone up a lot, and I think Karmic's kind of everywhere, and we'll see that as we go through. And I don't see in the PTR any proposed nerfs for him. Let me know in the comments, do you think Karmic needs a nerf? Is he too strong? Is he just good enough? And remember, in the last patch, they changed the way that the puffs work, so you can play puffs anywhere now. And so we'll see things like the heal puff there in 6th place, going up from 37th. And the heal puff's an interesting one because it starts healing immediately when it's on the bridge. A disruptor puff needs to wait to switch. A mana puff needs to wait to generate. But the heal puff goes straight away. It probably needs a nerf, to be honest. And the shroom puff as well. Although that's not here in the top 27, that's very powerful because you take a bridge and basically instantly generate a shroom. I mentioned briefly with the rarities, most cards are common. 17 of the top 27 cards here are common, so they're super easy to get and craft. And only one of these top cards is legendary, and that's the number 1 card. I believe that's Karmic. Every single card was used. Let me know in the comments, what do you think were the least used cards? There were 2 cards that were equally least used. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? And if you're interested about where the new Berserker is, she's number 78 overall, so not being seen too often. Oh, and a quick reminder, should have probably said this before, but if we are talking about how these slides work, we've got a little color key in the top left. So if the border is green, it means the rank's increased. If it's red, it's decreased. If it's white, it's a new card. And if it's black, the rank is the same. There's 2 numbers on each card. The top left one is its current rank, so Karmic is current 1. And the second number at the top right is its previous rank, so 15 for Karmic. And we'll be using that same one as we go through. Okay, so those are the top cards overall, but let's break them down to the different game modes. First of all, we're going to look at the non-spells, so minions or buildings, and then we'll look at the spells separately. So we can see, like we mentioned there, the Mana Puff in solos, 5th most played card, up from 50th. So those puffs really are being played a lot more. And the Heal Puff there in 1st, up from 8th. So the power of the puffs is you can play them anywhere, quick bridge grab. You can, if you know the speed of them and the speed of other units, you can kite things nicely with them. You can easily take a hit and stuff like that. So they are really powerful. And if you look at the cards in the top 1v1 non-spell cards, most of them are sort of cheap cycle cards, which gives you an idea of what the nature of the overall decks are. So the Mana Puff went up 2.3%, Heal Puff went up 2%, Defenso Chopper, and I think the Defenso Chopper has been played a lot in solos because we're seeing a lot of the Nether Bats and the Bats in wreck decks, and the Defenso Chopper is obviously great against that. Haunting Hugger fell off. War Dancers got that changed to only spawn horizontally. They fell off a bit as well. Wogasaur Pop got a nerf, and he dropped off. Randoms, we can see Karmic there. So Karmic seems to be more of a 2v2 card, but definitely seeing a lot of play there, and he's the #1 card in randoms. Gone up 3.4% from 8th to 1st. Defenso's still up there. Cleaver, very strong card if played correctly. It's such a simple card, but people always play it incorrectly. Don't just send it across the bridge and hope for the best. Use it defensively, use it where you can get value, and then get whatever extra value you can get once your opponents take charge of the fight. Curse Bearer and Haunting Hugger, we know Curse is going to be strong in especially in 2v2s. There's a lot of things, a lot more big units for the Curse to get value, and a lot more units kind of overall. Right, and the overall top non-spell card, Karmic, followed by Defenso Chopper and Tantrum Throwers. Right, let's switch up to look at the spells. Again, we're split in between solos, randoms, and pre-mades. So solos, Daggerfall was #1 last season, is still #1 this season, although the play rate of it did drop off. Chain Lightning went up a little bit. Bats, as we spoke about with Wrecked, seeing a lot of play. Dragon Ball seeing one of the biggest increases, up from 11th to 4th. Frostfeather Flyby has dropped off. Snap Freeze dropped off after it got that bug fix, so it doesn't freeze for too long anymore. If we look at the 2v2 randoms and pre-mates, you start seeing more AoE spells that can deal with big clumps of units like the Beam of Doom. You get Poison Strike, especially if it's activated. Beavalanche, we know that doesn't do what it quite did before, but it's still clearly a spell of choice. So that's always good to see. And the Blade Star in the PTR is receiving an interesting change. I don't know if I like it or not. I need to try it. But it's basically going to go twice as fast, but last half the time. I'm not really sure what the thinking is behind that. I feel like it's going to make some situations easier, like the bouncing between a minion and a tower. If you just get it in there, it's going to just stay in there. The minion's not going to be able to walk away. So that'll be better than the current situation. But if you miss, it's not going to go around and maybe hit some things quite so much. But I don't know. But I mean, if it's going twice as fast for half the time, it still covers the same distance. I don't know. I don't like the change. I don't know what the point of it is. I'm very confused. I thought about it, and I'm even more confused. Right, overall, Beavalanche was the spell of choice. Substantially ahead of 2nd place Daggerfall and 3rd place Blade Star. Legendary is always fun to look at, especially for newer players. They always want to get their hands on Legendaries. Which ones you want to craft? What's the best bang for your buck? What's the best Legendary? Remember, we looked at the rarities earlier, and most of the cards in a deck are not Legendaries. So you don't need Legendaries everywhere, but a few powerful Legendaries can make a deck. And we can see Karmic is the legendary of choice in all 3 game modes. And overall, interestingly, the Veil Stalker is the 2nd most played legendary. And the Karmic is played like 4 times as much as her, something like that. So Karmic is wildly played compared to everything else. So we got Karmic, Razor Squadron, Veil Stalker in solos, and then of course we get things like the Reckonator and Bara when we get to 2v2s, and those units can help start dealing with bigger chunks of enemies. Right, so let's quickly switch to draft. Again, draft is not quite the same because you can't choose exactly what you want, but there's definitely cards that we see a lot in draft and cards that are very powerful in draft, one of which is Jade Spark Watchers. I pretty much always choose this when I get the opportunity. Didn't seem to get played that much last time, but it's up from 53rd to 1st place, which is kind of wild. Stint in there, Karmic still being played here a lot, even if you can't just choose it for yourself. So if you're drafting, then definitely have a look at this. We see Berserker up there. You know, she has like sort of the bonuses to, she's new, so people might want to try her out more than whether they think she's good or not. But yeah, if you keep this little sheet to hand when you're drafting, you can't just necessarily pick all of these cards because, you know, you need some kind of build, some kind of order in your deck, some kind of synergy. But yeah, choosing these cards, you're going to be able to get a great draft run. Right. And then the second thing to look alongside that with the draft are the top spells in draft. So Infiltration, this interesting one. Infiltration would definitely not be a top spell outside of draft, but in draft it's been the spell of choice for this season. Bats, 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 we saw that quite a lot in solos, and that's being seen in draft as well. And of course we see a lot of the common ones, the Chain Lightning, the Bearavalanche, the Daggerfall, always being good choices. Scrutillery always seems to do better in draft than it does elsewhere. Okay, mentioned before, we are going through this quite quickly, but if you do need to pause, please do so. Right, so we looked at the Masters and the draft. Let's combine them to have a look at our top decks. So we're going to look at the top solo decks, and the idea of the top decks is we've looked through the data, and we're looking at one deck for each master, and we're considering where the deck was on the leaderboard, and the average rating of the cards within it. So a high-ranked deck with cards of a low overall ranking. You know, the best card is 1, for example. That'll show us the top, in quotes, deck. So we can see here the number 1 deck, we've got Wrecked with the Void Altar and the Bats, Bats, Bats. Very aggro. One thing we can't see from this is the alt perks that are being used, but we can make an assumption that they're going to be using the Mass Illusion, and something like this deck will be much weaker in the next patch if the changes go through. We see Ratbow there, which is kind of interesting since we don't see a Ratbow that often in solos, but we're seeing one there. And the decks will be, as I said, they'll be in order of their strength. So the Ratbow is the 2nd strongest one, so that's the order they're in. So we see there, it's got an aimbot, it's got Karmic, it's got some tech generation. Then we see a powerful Volko deck, lots of aggro units there. Again, Ravager, another aggro setup here. Valorian, still seeing the War Dancers there. And then we'll just complete out the rest of the 1v1 decks. So here we have a Setsu deck, which looks basically like the 1v1 deck, but it was Setsu instead. But it must have been much lower down on the rankings. That's why it's not up there with Wrecked. A Milloween deck. We got Dragon's Nest in here, Rockin' Roller, not playing the Snap Freeze after the bug fix there. Morelia got a couple of cheap units to cycle, and then we got Gax and some Rammer stuff. Diona, Korgoth deck, and a nice King Puff deck in there with the Dragon Ball. Couple of decks there using the Dragon Ball, and then we have Apep, Stormbringer, Tromvir, and Mordar. The Mordar deck, Void Altar, Korgoth, so lots of Voidborn. You know, we've seen a lot of Voidborn. We saw that was the number 1 choice, the number 1 faction being played. Right, let's have a look at random decks. So the top random deck was apparently this Apep deck. So remember, we've got the little square above like the Karmic in the number 1 place there. That's the wildcards, because unfortunately we still have wildcards in randoms. So we have Apex there, Defenso Chopper, Rock and Roller is a big clear. Rock and Roller I see played a lot, but I see misplayed a lot. Remember, it's like 10 mana. People just play it as though they're getting a golem. They roll over the bridge. They don't hit anything. They don't take the bridge. It's just kind of horrible. So it's very strong, but you've got to use it appropriately. Look, Blade Star in the top 4 decks. So we've got Apep, Ratbow, Wrecked, King Puff, Stormbringer decks here. So whatever you're looking to try out, there should be a deck here for you. On the second page, we've got a Valorian deck. Interestingly, seeing Rendrath in there. Don't see him too often, but he can be good. Again, Rendrath's another one of those that you've got to play defensively. Get value out of him and then let your opponent deal with him as he goes across the board. Morelia. Not an Accursed Morelia. Volko. We've got a Shrewmummer. Sort of a Zenshi Volko there. Mordor. Not a Ritual Mordor. Diona with a Future Present. Lots of cheap cards in there. And then finally we have Tronvir, Ravager, Milloween, and last but not least, we have Setsu. And then we'll complete the deck section by having a look at the pre-mades. So top deck in pre-mades is Apep. So one thing to take into account with pre-mades is, well, two things. There's no wildcards, just like solos. And the second thing is, some of these pre-made decks are designed specifically to play with another deck. And that's where they'll be best. So just taking this deck and playing with something else might not work out as well. So keep that in mind. So sometimes you see things like a Guardian in a deck with no Crystal Elves. You think that makes no sense, but they're playing with someone, playing Stormbringer Crystal Elf, something like that. So there we see Apep. Chief Icebreaker both getting a lot of play here. Not so much in randoms for some reason. So we got an Apep, a Ratbow, Tronvir. Tronvir did get his ult perk buffed a little bit, but I still think it's bad. Stormbringer, classic Crystal Elf Bringer. And see here we see a Diona with a Guardian with no crystals. So, you know, maybe these two decks go together. Maybe they don't. Who knows? Page 2, we've got King Puff. Similar to a deck that I would play. Nice and horde heavy. Generate those Night Puffs. Milloween, start seeing some more spells. Wrecked. Pretty strong Wrecked deck here. We've got a Scrapyard in there. Did get a bit of a buff in the last patch where you can't get Simulacrum from it anymore. Valorian. We see a Mordor deck against not a Ritual deck. It's a Korgoth deck. And then we'll close out here. We've got Ravager, Morelia, Volko. This is a Volko Elfbringer sort of Volko, Elfco. And then Setsu. Okay, so that concludes the decks section. So what I want to do in the next section, we're just going to go through it very quickly. This is kind of the extra stuff that we had for the separate videos that we're not going to cover in detail here, but we're going to go through them very quickly. And if you want to look at them yourself, you can pause the video and have at it. Okay, so overall top cards for 1v1. Top cards non-spells for 1v1. Top spells 1v1. Null Matrix making an appearance there. Okay, top legendaries in solos. And then we're going to look at, so this is going to be for randoms now. So the top cards in randoms overall. The non-spell top cards in randoms. The top spells in randoms. And the top legendaries in randoms. Top cards in pre-mades. Top cards non-spells in pre-mades. Top spells in pre-mades. And top legendaries in pre-mades. Reminder, pause the video if you want to check this data out. We're going through it very quickly because there's a lot of them. Okay, next up we'll look at the top cards for Masters. So the top cards for Apep in solos, in randoms, and in pre-mades. Reminder, check the deck number at the bottom. Gives you an idea of how many decks this data represents. Is it a good representative sample or is it only a few decks? Next up we have Diona. So Diona in solos, Diona in randoms, and Diona in pre-mades. Then we have King Puff. King Puff in solos, King Puff in randoms. King Puff in pre-mades. Next up we have Milloween in solos. Randoms. Pre-mades. Next up Mordar. Solo Mordar. Random Mordar. Pre-made Mordar. Morelia in solos. In randoms. And in pre-mates. And then we have a look at the stuff for Wrecked. So this is Wrecked solos, Wrecked randoms, and Wrecked pre-mates. Ratbo in solos, Ratbo in randoms, and Ratbo in pre-mates. Now solo Ravager, randoms Ravager, pre-mates Ravager, Setsu in solos, Setsu in randoms, Setsu in pre-mates, Stormbringer in solos, Stormbringer in randoms, Stormbringer in pre-mates. And we have Tronvir in solos, Tronvir in randoms, Tronvir in pre-mates. I feel like my browser's going to crash. Now we have Valorian in solos, Valorian in randoms, and Valorian in pre-mates. Almost there. Volco in solos, Volco in randoms, and Volco in pre-mates. That's it. We got through it. Great work, everyone. Okay, that was a lot of data we went through. I tried to go through it interestingly, but also quickly. We've had more data than ever before in one video, but hopefully it's not as long as it has been before. Reminder, a lot of time and effort goes into these videos, so it would really help me out if you hit that subscribe button. Give it a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. Let me know in the comments what do you think about this. And again, I mentioned it a few times, but we went through a lot of data. If you want to pause the video, screenshot it, whatever you need to do to see the data, have at it. You have my blessing. That's pretty much all I want to cover. I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank. My name's Bad as a Fish.